Good morning. I'm going to talk about the landscape of SDN. I'm not sure how much of the Kool-Aid you got so far, but I'm going to add to that. Um, so let's see. So what SDN can solve? So it could be like the mess of the traffic where you don't know where the packets are going, or and you could see it could solve in such a way that it could streamline everything, right? Or if you're really an operator and you're maintaining your networks and all the connections, and you may think it could make it clean, perfect, and everything is in order. Is that what all SDN can do? So let's see various definitions you might have heard so far or thus far. So the fundamental definition, what you could or what you hear most likely is that separation of control plane and the data plane, right? The other definition is software-driven networks. That means software is driving the networks. It's not just software defined, but not it also drives the network. Then you might have heard, okay, SDN is all about commodities hardware. That means there is no specific hardware. You could buy a server from Dell and you could just instantiate a VM, and there you go. You have a core router. Or you might have heard that it's going to reduce the OPEX and CAPEX. How low you could go? We were talking. The maximum or the minimum you could go is there is no OPEX and there is no CAPEX, right? So that's maximum you could go. Is that what SDN is all about? Or is it any device anywhere, like you could configure a switch into a router or whatever, right? The other important aspect where you have seen is now there won't be any more vendor lock-in. So you buy from me or you buy from anyone, but you run this software and it works. You have the controller and it can work with any kind of device from any vendor. So that means you're not tied to a single operator or single vendor device. The other one is network abstraction. You abstract various sorts of information sets and you manage at a different layer. So that is another definition of SDN. The final definition I have is self-defined networks. That means you can define whatever you want and call it SDN. So it's pretty much, that's what these days, when people talk about, it's very difficult to tie one to another, and it's very difficult to contain what SDN is all about. So I'm going to talk about, because this is not any vendor pitch or anything, I'm going to talk purely from technical aspect, what it takes to achieve the so-called SDN, what all we perceive or however we think. So we have different components. I'm going to talk a little bit later. So let's see where exactly SDN is right now. So is it deployed everywhere? Maybe in data centers and mobile backhaul. There are some cases where I personally was involved in deploying SDN in those cases, but it's not everywhere. So that means it's still work in progress. And with respect to commodity hardware, there are very few vendors who provide sets of hardware and say now everything is virtual and you could do that. So, but if you talk to major vendors, you don't find this kind of hardware available or made available to them. You still have to buy specific device which does a specific function, but the software could be abstracted and could be generalized. Then you could see vendor interoperability. Yeah, that was the goal, but if you really check the landscape, one vendor cannot really interoperate with another vendor. So that means you are tied to a specific vendor and the ecosystem. With respect to standardization, standardization, I'm involved in standardization, but it takes a long time because the main fundamental goal of standardization is to make things work or interoperate with one another. But it has its own drawbacks. So one of the things which the major initiative which is being underway is with respect to open source. So this is one of the things which is changing the landscape. And with respect to OPEX and CAPEX, I think things may improve. At this point of time, if you see, it may add more cost because, for example, if you want to operate, you need to change the way you operate networks. So you need to train your operators, or you need to ensure the new technologies are adopted. So it takes a while. So at this point of time, this is not something out there. And with respect to new services, there are few services where you could really deliver with the SDN or the new NFE or whatever you call, but not too many services at this point of time. You still have to deal with the existing network services and how you can transform in the SDN domain, into SDN domain. So let's see some of the reality check. So data plane programming, yeah, absolutely. You could program with OpenFlow or whatever you like. And OpenFlow, for example, yeah, it is there. The spec is out there, and different versions of OpenFlow is there. But if you really talk about scalable networks, I don't think it really is out there yet. I don't think you could really scale networks with the existing technologies. And with respect to common API, it's still work in the progress, and we are touching just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot to do. And with respect to bare metal, I don't know how the progress, but if you really check it out, very few vendors provide you that kind of option. And CapEx, still it is expensive. You can't discount that it's very cheap or it's very free, or because all you're doing is moving cost from one place to another. So the CapEx is not reduced yet. And whether centralized control or OPEX, there's still question mark on those fronts as well. And interoperability is a big challenge at this point of time because everyone thinks SDN in their own terms and how they want to do and how they want to provide. So that means the interoperability is still a big challenge in this area. So let's take some of the technical challenges. What are the technical challenges out there? Especially efficient use of resources, because this is the biggest selling point of SDN. And with respect to efficient use of resources, it's still quite complex. You cannot overcome that, and you cannot really provide. With respect to service protection, you could say I'm providing the service, but in terms of providing protection and quality of service and all those things, it's still you have to go through different layers, and it is not unified yet. And with respect to costs, I know you all know better than me, it is a big challenge. If you talk about virtual networks, how are you going to provide quality of service all the way down to the transport layer? So you still have to deal with multiple technologies. And with respect to standard API, one of the important initiatives which is happening is with respect to models. We are creating a lot of data models, information models, config models. So this is the starting point, and we are trying to create much more than that with respect to different services and how you can model different type of services. And operations and manageability, this is one of the key important aspects for the success of SDN. If you cannot manage in a simple and programmatic way, you cannot operate the networks, because the things we are talking about in terms of scale and the kind of services, you need to have a better operations and manageability, not just vendor specific, but rather vendor agnostic. And hybrid networks. So not every network is a greenfield, as you know. So whenever you introduce a new technology, you need to ensure how you can interoperate with the existing deployments and how you're going to interwork with them. So of course, the complexity with all the protocols, all we are doing right now is to add more protocols, and so that's not going to stop, at least in the near future. So what next? So API is the key, programming data plane, uh, talk about the real networks, and of course open source, because that's where everyone could contribute, and distributed network OS, and orchestration and manageability. So these are some of the key aspects and which we are all working on, and different vendors are working on too. So I think ensuring those things are getting solved will enable SDN to be successful. So in short time, that's all I could say. Thank you.